225. State interest versus public interest. Chalcedon Position Paper number 38, March 1983. In a recent trial in a federal court, questioned by the state attorney gave me an opportunity to enter into the records some thoughts which would otherwise have been objected to by the state. Constant reference had been made about the compelling state interest, which ostensibly made state intervention into the life of the church and its schools a necessity. The most compelling state interest should be freedom with justice. As a matter of fact, in my earliest school days, this was stressed. The climax of the Pledge of Allegiance states the purpose of the United States, the Federal Union, as liberty and justice for all. Now, however, a compelling state interest means controls. The obvious fact in those trials is that Christian schools are providing markedly superior teaching in both moral training and in academic disciplines. The state schools are usually a nightmare of lawlessness and ignorance and have given the United States its highest rate of illiteracy in its history. The, quote, compelling state interest, end quote, of which the state attorneys speak, is the power to control. A century ago in France, Léon Gambetta made it clear that equality was more important to the state than freedom, and that both equality and liberty had to give way to fraternity, which for him was force. He said, "Force is an indivisible element in the grandeur of races." Basic to fraternity and force for him were state schools. For him, too, morality was to be derived from the politics of the state, not the church. E.M. Acom, The French Laïc Laws, 1879 to 1889. New York, New York, Octagon Books, 1967. This was nothing new. When Diocletian further centralized power over the people and began the savage persecution of Christians, he spoke about power to the people. The publicity theme of his coinage was Genio Populi Romani. That is, he deified the Roman people even as he enslaved them. The cult of Rome and the Roman people went hand in hand with the enslavement of Rome and of all the people. Michael Grant, The Climax of Rome, Boston, Massachusetts, Little, Brown, 1968. The state has long had a habit also of using every occasion to do a little good as an opportunity to advance a great deal of evil. Thus, in late 18th century Austria, Joseph II used the same goals as the French Revolution to centralize his power. The serfs were freed to break the feudal power and strengthen the monarchy. As Belloff noted, both liberty and equality were devices by which the state could be strengthened. Instead of various levels of feudal power, all citizens were made equally subordinate to a central power and bureaucracy, and equally taxable. The age of the French Revolution saw in France and elsewhere temporary or illusory freedoms accompanied by great increases of centralized state power. The illusion was that increased state powers would eliminate ancient evils, when, in reality, they created greater ones. As a result, the, quote, age of absolutism ended only to see the beginning of a new and greater one in the 20th century. Max Beloff, The Age of Absolutism, 1660 to 1815, New York, New York, Harper, 1962, page 127, etc. For a time, the free market extended liberties, but the growing powers of the central state in time suppressed these freedoms. The state, as the new god, was asserting its sovereign powers. This had religious consequences. Bismarck in Germany made the state paramount over all things. He was pragmatically a conservative and a liberal, whichever served the state best at the moment. Theodor Fontana, who described himself as Bismarck's greatest admirer, once said in another context, "Bismarck was the greatest despiser of principle that ever existed. Fritz Stern, gold and iron, Bismarck, Bleichroeder, and the building of the German Empire, New York, New York, Alfred Knopf, 1977, page 280. For Bismarck, the state interest could not be subordinated to any other interest. This is the mark of the statist, whether he calls himself a liberal, conservative, fascist, or radical. All things must be subordinated to the interest of the state. Our rising American fascism clearly manifests this premise in its attack on the freedom of religion. Even Theodor Mommsen was an exponent of such statism. He appealed to deracinated Jews to join the church because, he explained, the nation-state hates all vestiges of particularism. Much later, the Nazis added to this hatred not only the Jews, but all churches. Rosenberg, in The Myth of the 20th Century, 1931, declared, "All German education must be based on the recognition of the fact that it is not Christianity that has brought us morality, but Christianity that owes its enduring values to the German character." The churches were therefore attacked for opposing the compelling state interest. The Catholic Bishop of Berlin, von Preysing, held to the contrary. Justice is not derived from the will of the society. There is an eternal right outside man's will and guaranteed by God. By the end of 1938, however, the Nazis had suppressed all church schools in Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, Saxony, Thuringia, Oldenburg, the Saar, and large parts of Prussia and Austria. Religious publications were also suppressed in the United States in 1983. Not only are Christian schools under attack, but also religious publishing houses, as witnessed the case of the Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing Company. In Germany in the 1930s, it was declared that children are to be trained as though they had never heard of Christianity. M. Cyril Bates, Religious Liberty, An Inquiry, New York, New York, Da Capo Press, 1972, page 31. In the United States, such education has long been the reality of statist education, with humanism as the established religion of the state schools. Now the attack has been launched against Christian schools. The Nazi goal was uniformity, hence all particularism was attacked and suppressed. Jews, Christians, Gypsies, all alike were anathema. The Jews were identified with hated causes, that is, communism and capitalism, and the same applied to the churches at the time. The same has been even more true, and with unequalled barbarism and savagery, in the Soviet Union. There, the old revolutionary ideal of liberty, fraternity, and equality is mocked by reality. There is neither fraternity nor liberty, and the only equality is in slavery. The statist road to the old liberal goals has proven to be the road to hell. The state has insisted upon identifying the state interest with public interest. This means that the state is equated with the people. Such an identification ensures totalitarianism, because the state then is the voice and even the incarnation of the people. To oppose the state means to oppose the people, and dissenters are clarified as enemies of the people. No private concern nor any public concern can then exist. To oppose the state interest is to oppose the will of the people. Because the state interest is at the same time identified with justice and moral concern, a most arrogant Pharisaism ensues. This is presently the position of most bureaucracies the world over. It is certainly the stance in the United States of state and federal attorneys as they confront churches and their functions. It is they who speak as the voice of justice and morality, as the guardians of the, quote, public interest, end quote. All too often, as history makes clear, the state interest has been the enemy of the public interest. The statists see a compelling state interest in the control of the spheres of education, economics, religion, and more. Once having assumed the sovereignty or lordship of the state, there is then logically no limitation on either the jurisdiction or the power of the state. Sovereignty or lordship means total and ultimate authority. Those who acknowledge the lordship of Jesus Christ can then withhold no area of life and thought from his dominion. Given the sovereignty or lordship of the triune God, it follows of necessity that law must proceed from God, because lawmaking is an attribute of sovereignty. Antinomianism is a denial of God's sovereignty and an implicit affirmation of the state's lordship. Sovereignty has been very briefly defined as complete power. Clearly, complete power can only be an attribute of the triune God. Every state claiming sovereignty, however, logically seeks to gain complete power over all things, especially the mind and bodies of men. Such an effort leads to totalitarianism and tyranny. To gain surface compliance to its claim to sovereignty, such a state resorts to measures designed to subjugate man. To this, there are two approaches. The first, so ably described by Roland Huntford in The New Totalitarians, is by controlling education. Only state-controlled and state-approved instruction which meets the state's needs for conformity is approved. Since the Church is a teaching ministry, this means control of the churches in all aspects of their ministry. The new totalitarians are consummate hypocrites in their war against biblical faith. They mask it with a multitude of bureaucratic concerns, zoning regulations, the need for supervision and regulation, the compelling state interest in all such matters, and so on and on. The Marxists openly persecute biblical faith. The new totalitarians do it by indirection. Second, Marxist totalitarianism relies only secondarily on education and primarily on total terror. By means of torture, slave labor camps, fear and suppression, the Marxist dictators strive for the total compliance of their peoples. The psalmist, Psalm 115 verse 3, tells us that God the Lord is unlike all false gods. But our God is in the heavens, he hath done whatsoever he hath pleased. God's sovereignty is undivided. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4. God therefore requires an undivided allegiance. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 5. These words by Moses are the mandate for obedience to God's law. Because he is the Lord, the sovereign, the ultimate one, he must be totally obeyed with all our love, in all our being. Our Lord, in repeating these words of Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 5, thereby reconfirmed the sole sovereignty of God and the full authority of his law. Luke chapter 10 verse 27. Significantly, Muhammad, while departing from the biblical premises at many points, retains this one: the sovereignty of God. There is no God but God. It was this premise which gave Islam power. Religions which deny the sovereignty of their, quote, God, end quote, become polytheistic. It is logically impossible to ascribe sovereignty to any being other than God and still retain a God in one system. The transfer of sovereignty to the state means that lawmaking and lordship are transferred to the state. The power to make laws is the power to declare things to be good and evil. Since Aristotle's state, in his Politics, is the source of law, his state was also the source of morality. Nazi Germany was emphatic that morality came from the state, not from the Bible. The state schools of America and other countries also see morality as a man-created or state-created thing. Value education is established by these educators on humanistic, statist foundations. All over the world, quote, sovereign, end quote, states are manifesting their tyrannies. The Great Tyranny, Soviet Russia, brutally and ruthlessly manifests its tyrant power against Christianity and against all dissent in any form. The Western democracies are, in varying degrees, replacing the God of Scripture with themselves and are, in many instances, infringing on or suppressing Christian liberties. Israel, indignant at Arab hostility, is repressive of Arab and Christian dissent, while the Arabs are repressive towards Jews and Christians. All self-righteously assert their right to do as they please in terms of compelling state interests. Compelling state interests are essentially and ultimately hostile to God as their rival and to man as a dissenter. We must assert that there is a compelling theological interest in freedom. To acknowledge the sovereignty of and predestination by the triune God is to deny the sovereignty of the state and predestination, that is, total planning and control, by the state. Sovereignty and predestination are exclusive attributes. If God is the Lord, if there is no God but God, then neither man nor the state can be the sovereign or Lord. If essential and ultimate determination, planning and control belong to God alone, then no man nor state can assume such a prerogative unto itself. Men and nations then must acknowledge God's sovereignty, and men and nations must seek to know their place and calling in God's plan. There is then a compelling public interest to know, obey, and serve God, for man's chief end is to glorify God and to serve Him forever.